Earlier this week, President Obama, in a very controversial move, vetoed a bill that would allow the families of victims of 9/11 attacks to sue the government of Saudi Arabia. This morning, the Senate overruled that veto with a 97-1 vote, despite the unusual 3-page Obama message accompanying his veto expressing deep sympathy for the victims' families. And while the Saudi government has actively lobbied against this bill and even persuaded major U.S. companies with investments in the kingdom like Boeing, GE, and Dow Chemical to join those lobbying efforts, it seems that these families will have their day in court. So just what's in the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA? And why is Obama so opposed to it? Put simply, JASTA will allow U.S. families of those killed during the 9/11 attacks to file lawsuits against countries suspected of sponsoring terrorism. The bill also stipulates that any further acts of terrorism that occur in the U.S. and cause fatalities could leave the potential terrorist nation of origin subject to litigious action. Justice opponents are using the classic argument that this bill is anti-business and anti-diplomacy, claiming that JASTA's passage will not only lead to other nations freezing billions of dollars in U.S. assets, but even worse, that it will lead to the exposure of biblical amounts of sensitive correspondence between the Saudi government and the U.S., and then also compromise current relationships and reveal the details of ongoing intelligence efforts. Some opponents are invoking the time-honored national security boogeyman, arguing that JASTA would shift authority over matters of national security from the President and Congress to the judiciary, which may be ill-equipped to deal with international matters. Now, while there's some validity to these fears, they pale in comparison to the benefits of passing JASTA. The judiciary makes judgments. That's kind of their thing. And discovery is an essential part of the judicial process, so sensitive information will be protected in court. But I must admit, I'm also on the side of airing more of the US government's dirty laundry instead of automatically keeping what our representatives are doing in our name secret from us for half a century until those responsible are long gone. Yet that's precisely how the system works today. Seriously, guys, look up the Bay of Pigs, okay? And also, there's already a law that allows US citizens to sue any country our government has designated a state sponsor of terrorism. Countries like Iran, for example. Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, is not on that list. JASTA will override these government designations and set a precedent for suits against any country that sponsors terrorism. But the result of the bill's passage that foreign policy mavens fear the most is that JASTA could allow lawsuits against the greatest sponsor of terrorism on earth. I'm talking about the United States of America. Now, what does it say about our democracy if our president is terrified of American citizens holding foreign states accountable for the acts of terrorism they've sponsored on our soil? Is our sensitive economic and military relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a country notorious for committing human rights abuses, executing gay people, and treating women like second-class citizens, worth it? Or is the real fear that something much more nefarious will be exposed by investigations into the 9/11 attacks? The 9/11 victims' families have a right to know just how deeply the Saudi Arabian government was involved in the attacks that killed 3,000 Americans. The only reason to keep that information hidden is to shield the perpetrators and their enablers here in the US from being exposed. I can see why members of the Bush administration would oppose this bill. They're the ones at risk. But the fact that Obama also adamantly opposes JASTA's passage, well, that leads me to wonder what future lawsuits he might be afraid of. But I leave that up to you guys to decide. I'm Hassan Piker, and this is The Breakdown.